Midway was released this past weekend, which was Veterans Day weekend. What a coincidence. Midway tells the story of the Battle of Midway from the perspective of the soldiers who fought it, from the men behind the scenes. The Battle of Midway was proven to be a crucial turning point in World War II, especially in the Pacific Theater, and this is the story of what that battle entailed, the behind the scenes of the battle, and what led up to the Battle of Midway. Roland Emmerich directed this film, and Roland Emmerich has directed some good films in the past, like The Patriot is one of my favorite films of all time. He's also directed Independence Day from like 1996. In all its cheesy gloriness, there's a lot of fun to be had in that movie. But that's really about it when it comes to Roland Emmerich and good movies, because the Godzilla movie he did was horrible. 2012 was horrible. 10,000 BC was horrible. The writer for all of those movies, Dean Devlin, directed Geostorm and wrote Geostorm. That was a movie I despised a couple years ago. So Roland Emmerich getting his hands on a World War II biopic immediately worried me. And the trailers didn't really do anything for me other than give me that vibe that this is really just Pearl Harbor. This is a sequel to Pearl Harbor. That's what I was thinking throughout this whole thing. I was like, this just looks like a spiritual sequel to Pearl Harbor, and it's going to be nothing more or less than that. And I feel like I'm basically right, because this movie is very, very hollow. It is a very shallow movie. It is very lifeless. There's no soul to this movie. There's just so many characters in this movie that, A, appear out of thin air like they're magicians or God or something. I don't know what happened with half the characters in this movie, because they just appear out of thin air like it's all normal and dandy. And then the characters also just don't have any character development. There's no characterization for any of the characters in here. So why should I care about a retelling of Midway if you're not going to characterize any of the characters that you're now fictionalizing for the big screen? I get that this was an important moment in history, but I'm not going to care about that moment in history if there's no characters to root for in this entire movie. This movie is also littered with horrible performances. Ed Skrein, you might know him, or Skrein, I think that's how you say his name, Skrein, I don't know. Ed Skrein, you might know him from Deadpool. He played Francis. He is horrible in this movie. That is one of the worst performances I've seen all year. And of course, he plays like the most cliched Navy bomber pilot ever, who's this hot shot and thinks he's always right. Of course, because in a war movie, we have to have a character like that. That's the type of substance we have here. And it's nothing. There's no substance. And when it comes to Ed Skrein, I feel like he was just playing a cartoon version of himself from Deadpool and everything else I've seen him in. He's a cartoon. Actors that really probably shouldn't be in this movie are in this movie. Like Woody Harrelson is in this movie. Why? Patrick Wilson is in this movie. Why? Luke Evans is in this movie. Why? Dennis Quaid is in this movie. Why? Aaron Eckhart is in this movie for like 2 minutes. Why? This movie is honestly the definition of a paycheck movie. This was a paycheck for everybody involved. They had to take on this project to pass the time between their next project, and they felt like they weren't getting paid enough while they were sitting at home doing nothing, and they just collected a paycheck, and Roland Emmerich didn't direct them at all, because everybody's emotionless in this movie. Everybody just stands still like they're all stoic and creepy. It's like, what are you staring at, buddy? The only time Roland Emmerich actually directs this film is in the action sequences, which I thought were the best parts of this movie. They weren't the greatest battle scenes I've seen in a war movie, but at least when those were happening, I was at least somewhat entertained, and it looked clean. Those scenes do have an over-reliance on special effects, but it wasn't to the extent that like Michael Bay would use them. There are a lot of Michael Bay explosions in this movie, which honestly, this movie does feel like somebody watched Pearl Harbor in that sense, was inspired by Pearl Harbor, and was like, oh my god, Pearl Harbor, greatest war movie ever made. Let's just remake that, but with a different director who's also not that great, who's like Michael Bay 2.0, because this is literally a Michael Bay movie in that regard, but at least the special effects, like, I could at least buy the fact that stuff kept blowing up and blowing up and blowing up, even though it did get a bit distracting, but the action scenes were a little entertaining to watch, and I thought that Roland Emmerich handled those scenes and directed those scenes in a competent manner. I wouldn't say a great manner, but competent manner. And when it comes to the dialogue in this movie, I haven't heard worse dialogue in a war movie in a long time. I don't know where half of this dialogue came from. There's so much dialogue in here that's just so ham-fisted. It doesn't feel like something like people in the Navy or the military would even say. Like this, you can definitely tell that this script is the work of a rookie screenwriter, of somebody who's just getting started out in Hollywood. This screenplay really feels like it's a first draft. That's honestly one of the biggest mistakes you could ever make when making a movie. I'm working on a screenplay right now for one of my classes in college. And she's like, don't even go around submitting this because this is only a first draft. And I've already rewritten parts of that first draft about 3 or 4 times. Your first draft of a screenplay shouldn't be your shooting script. You need to know what to rewrite and rewrite. And if you need to take anything out, or if you need to expand on anything, that's called a second draft. That's called a third draft. That's called a fourth draft, or even a final draft. Not a first draft. That's what the screenplay feels like. This movie is literally filled with explosions in its action sequences. And it makes sense, but sometimes the special effects in those action sequences take away from the actual impact of this historical event and the impact that the movie is trying to build. This movie feels like it's a big, epic war movie. It feels like it stands toe-to-toe with the great epic war movies like Apocalypse Now, Saving Private Ryan, The Patriots, movies like that. Hacksaw Ridge is another one. There's no way this movie stands toe-to-toe with any of those movies. It is dull, it is lifeless, and there were times where this movie was just putting me to sleep. I wanted to see more of the behind-the-scenes stuff in this movie, too. They didn't show any of that, really, and that's kind of where some of the characterization of some of these characters just feels a bit hollow, because you could have fleshed out some characters a little bit more if you had showed some behind-the-scenes as to how they got some intel. There's not really much of that. This movie just wants to focus on the cool action set pieces. And yeah, even though it's a special effects-driven action war movie that feels like it's a Michael Bay movie, there is some entertainment to be had, and those scenes are competently directed. But other than that, the movie's fairly boring. This is a movie that is a quick cash grab. It came out on a weekend that they knew was profitable for a movie like this. Veterans Day weekend. Because you know what won in the box office this weekend? Midway. Dr. Sleep made nothing. So of course a war movie featuring military personnel and war veterans is going to be released on Veterans Day. What a coincidence. How ironic is that? This is why this movie is one of the most blatant attempts at a cash grab I have ever seen. There is some entertainment to be had in its action scenes, despite being special effects heavy and feeling like a Michael Bay movie at times. But those scenes are also competently directed. The rest of the movie is very flat. It does not feel like this screenplay was written as a final draft. It feels like a first draft. And with that, I'm going to give Midway a C-. I don't recommend this war movie. It was boring. I was almost falling asleep by the end, honestly, guys. I wanted to like this movie because I like war movies, but it's a Roland Emmerich movie. What else can you expect? Thank you for watching my review for Midway. I'm going to be reviewing Charlie's Angels very soon. I will leave my link to my website in the description below. There you can find all my links to my social media accounts. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching. My name is Alex Madden, and I'll see you at the movies somewhere.